All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So thanks for joining me today. My name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar. And today we're going to talk about how to build an enclave, securing CUI for CMMC compliance. Before I dive into the presentation itself, just want to cover a few housekeeping details. So today's session is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour. That does include Q&A. Now, you're going to be muted during today's presentation, but we did receive a number of questions prior to today's webinar. I think I have about 10 that I'll cover at the very end. You can also submit questions via the chat feature. I've got a colleague on the line that'll be answering those as they come in. If for some reason we do have an outage during today's session, just wait a minute and try to reconnect. You can either just refresh your page, or you can use that link that you received via email and come back into the session in that way as well. If you'd like to speak with one of our CMMC experts, or if you have any additional questions about Exostar, our products, our solutions, etc., you can reach out to us a couple of different ways. You can email us at cmmc-team@exostar.com. You can also come to our website, www.exostar.com. There's a chat feature there on every page. There's also a way to submit questions via a web form as well. Now, if one of the questions you have is, will I be receiving today's presentation? The answer is yes. As a follow-up to today's conversation, we'll be sending you a PDF version of the slides I'm presenting today, as well as a link to a recording of today's session. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and get started. So this is the agenda I'm going to cover today. Before I dive into the session about building an enclave, decisions to make, etc., I'm going to just cover I'm going to cover briefly the current state of CMMC. We'll then talk about an enclave or an all-in approach to protecting the controlled unclassified information you may receive. I'll present to you the Exostar solution of an enclave. I'll then get into the question and answers and go over those questions that I received prior to today's session. So let's kick off with that current state of the CMMC ruling. Hopefully, as most of you know, the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, was updated 12/16/2024 with the first of the CMMC program parts, Part 170. This 32 CFR was the action, if you will, that laid out the CMMC program. It laid out the differences, what this program entails. It's what now allows you to start to schedule those CMMC assessments with third parties. Those organizations are now able to work with you, schedule those assessments, get those things done, and actually get your those results updated into EMAS. Now, hopefully what you also all know is that the main difference between the CMMC program and what we currently have in Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations is that we've moved away from a self-attestation model to one that requires third-party assessments if you fall under those particular program requirements. Those third-party assessments are either done through a certified third-party assessment organization, and they're going to assess your compliance with NIST 800-171-R2. Or if you are a level 3 organization, DIBCAC is going to do that assessment. The CMMC levels are broken out as you see here. Level 1, Level 2, and Level 3. Now, the majority of organizations in the defense industrial base are Level 1. Those are organizations who just have to comply with FAR's Clause 5204-21. This has 15 requirements that you have to annually self-assess and affirm that you do those things. When we get into level 2, that's where you start to your program, your contract requires that you protect controlled unclassified information in accordance with NIST 800-171 R2. The reason I emphasize that R2 is just because there is an R3 currently out there. However, DoD has specifically outlined 800-171 R2. Now, level 2 is bifurcated. A small portion of organizations will be doing a self-assessment. They'll do that once every 3 years. They'll have to annually affirm that they do those things. Now, this is a small portion of organizations, right? Less than 2%. And it's the contracting body that will determine whether or not this, a particular contract qualifies for this. It's not something you'll be able to, if you will, put in an exception for or request. It'll be part of the contract or the RFP when it comes out. The majority of organizations in level 2, right, 35% of the DIB will be those organizations that require that third-party assessment. This is where you'll engage with a certified third-party assessment organization once every 3 years to evaluate your system security plan and the controls you have in place for NIST 800-171. And then a small portion of organizations will be required to do level 3. That, as I mentioned before, would be done by DIBCAC. That has those 110 controls from NIST 800-171. And additionally has 24 controls from NIST 800-172 as well. Now, when CMMC gets implemented, and it's going to be implemented 60 days after another CFR begins, that's 48 CFR, right? So when that regulation gets put in place, and actually I saw an update, it was on LinkedIn, so take this with a, with a grain of salt, but it was from a person in the community that I respect and absolutely listen to, is that I believe 48 CFR is in front of the Office of Management and Budget now. I have no idea how long that review takes, but that's kind of where it is in the rulemaking process. Once that rule gets put in place, 60 days after that, kind of the CMMC implementation plan takes effect. And this is what DoD has laid out as that implementation schedule. So the first phase is a year long where you'll pretty much see what you see today, where applicable solicitations will require level 1 or level 2 self-assessment. This will give the community, if you will, or the DIB itself, a chance to go ahead and implement those CMMC assessments, start to get those scheduled, start to get those in place, and it follows on with the current year, if you will, that's already been happening. After that initial 12-month phase, that's where you'll start to see solicitations for level 2 require that certification. Phase 3 is when you'll start to see level 3 certification be required. And then after those 36 months, you'll see a full implementation of the CMMC program. Now, obviously, the DoD may implement CMMC requirements in advance of these planned phases for particular programs that they deem critical. So always keep that in mind and pay attention to the contracts as they're, if you will, put out for bid. Now, regardless of CMMC, there are things you have to do today to be in compliance with current DoD contracts. So take a look at those contracts, understand what you have to do today, and if you've got those 7012 or 7019 clauses, those things have specific requirements. 7012 requires that you protect controlled unclassified information in accordance with NIST 800-171. Now, it has a lot of other caveats, right? You're allowed to have POAMs, plans of action and milestones for controls you don't have in place, but you need to understand where you are and know you're compliant. whether or not you're in compliance with a particular control, and you have to have a plan to address a control if you haven't implemented it yet. 7019 requires you to do that self-assessment in accordance with NIST 800-171A. That's the assessment guide for the 110 controls of NIST 800-171. It provides you a scoring system for each of those controls, whether or not you've implemented that control, what good implementation actually looks like, and then allows you to score yourself on that scale of 1, 3, or 5 points. You'll end up with a score somewhere between a negative 203 and a positive 110. You take that score and you enter it into the Supplier Performance Risk System, which is a DoD website. And this is one of the measures that DoD uses in compiling that Supplier Performance Risk Score. You should additionally, right, keep in, have POAMs open for controls you don't have in place. You should be actively working to close those using that plan of action and milestone format. If you close a POAM, you should go ahead and update your score accordingly and make sure you get that credit into the SPRS system and update your score accordingly. All of this goes to say just that the CMMC will fall in line with this. Right now, the next layer is that CMMC third-party assessment. But if you do these other things, or you have been doing them, you should have a fairly good idea of what you need to do before you're ready to engage with that third-party assessor. Now, let's talk about actually how we go about securing that controlled unclassified information. I'm mainly going to be talking about what do I do if I want to become level 2 compliant, right? So I want to be able to meet NIST 800-171. I want to ensure that I meet those necessary controls and that I can, have the evidence and those kinds of things that I need to satisfy that third party. Now, I'm going to talk about this much in the context of Microsoft and their solutions to be able to implement the NIST 800-171 controls. I want to be clear, though, that Microsoft is not the only solution, right? There are a lot of cloud providers. There are a lot of solutions out there that are built on top of other clouds. Google Cloud, Amazon has a Gov Cloud. There's a number of point solutions that get you in or that meet various requirements of NIST 800-171 or allow you to implement those controls. But we often get questions about Microsoft, their various cloud environments, and where they fit in. So wanted to provide everybody kind of this checklist of the different clouds that Microsoft Azure offers, the services that are in those, and which of the various regulations those different clouds meet. Because another question I often get is about, well, do I have to have GCC or GCC high in order to meet these requirements? And this is just a nice, easy graphic that allows you to set that baseline. And this, the title here is a link. So when you get this presentation in the PDF format, you'll be able to click that and see this goes to an article about those different environments, written by Richard Wakeman of Microsoft. You'll see this chart there, and it lays out those different requirements there along the left and which of the different cloud environments it meets. Now, if all you're trying to achieve is level 1, Microsoft Commercial does meet those 15 requirements. The one caveat there is that because things change, just because it works today for level 1 doesn't mean it always will. So that's the one caveat Microsoft also puts in the article. But as I mentioned, we're really focusing on level 2. So when you talk about level 2, you are talking about Microsoft Government Cloud, GCC, or Microsoft Government Cloud High, GCC High. The major difference between these is really when you start to see that ITAR and requirement. With Microsoft 365 Government, so just GCC, that isn't set up for ITAR. And the reason for that is that they don't necessarily have customer support done only in the US with US citizens, right? There are other support contacts that support GCC, which are outside the US, and they're commercial personnel. So that's why when you talk to Microsoft and you start to look at that, if you have ITAR, you are going to require GCC High. And I would just look at those other cloud providers, Google, Amazon, etc., just to ensure that you understand that kind of difference between their environments as well. Now, when you start to think about, what you need to do, what I often talk to Exostar customers about is, well, you need to first identify where CUI is in your systems and which of the people in your organization need to interact with that controlled unclassified information. And the easiest way to do this is really follow that data. So understand, how do you receive controlled unclassified information today? Are you going to a website, getting that information, and then bringing it down? Is it being sent to you via email from some outside body? Are you just creating it internally and then saving it somewhere? Then where do you store that information? And remember all the different places where information is stored. It's not only, maybe on my laptop, but if you use something like OneDrive or Google Cloud or something like that to do a file share, or that's where your backups are maintained, understand that, because those copies of those files are also in those locations. Understand the different people in your organization that access that. How do they store, process it? Very importantly, who supports your system? Do you have an MSP or an MSSP that maybe you outsource a portion of your IT functions to? And because of that, they also have access to these systems and that information? And then where are they and other users physically located? And do you not allow them to, download that information? Only, access that information from mobile devices and those kinds of things. So that'll often tell you, kind of the scope of your overall system. And then you'll want to start to diagram that. You're going to want to, physically build the data flow and a network diagram to determine all those different aspects. Because this will help you identify that system boundary, because that's going to very much inform your decision of whether or not an enclave is a solution for you. So can you shrink that boundary of controlled unclassified information so it's confined to certain people, certain systems, certain areas in your organization? Or do you have to consider the entire organization as that system boundary? When you start to think about that system boundary and all those different things that are part of it, you're going to start to encounter quite a number of different services that you use. These services are typically various cloud services or other IT services. And because you're leveraging these different things, you're going to have a different level of shared responsibility. And that shared responsibility may be something that you inherit because you're utilizing a particular service. And these services are broken down, as you see here on the right, where you have infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service. Or this is just things you do on-prem. Now, the part of this, or I'm sorry, this shared responsibility is either all on you, right? Customer management, right? You take on full responsibility of the physical, the infrastructure, the controls that are in place, et cetera, of everything around that particular solution. So, for example, if we're talking like Microsoft technologies, on-prem solutions are things like Active Directory. You may have a server that's running Active Directory as your IAM solution for your users. You may, as part of that, be utilizing, a SharePoint system. That's a bad word right now. I understand, the exploit that took place on Monday because of SharePoint systems that were on site. There are other things that Microsoft used or offered on site solutions, but now they've moved much of that to the cloud, and much of that is now offered as software as a service, right? So like Microsoft Active Directory, which was on-prem, is now Microsoft Entra, offered out as a service from Azure. So now you've taken on some of the risk, but Microsoft has adopted much of that risk themselves because they're now hosting, managing, they're responsible for that physical security, the servers, et cetera, that all that is run on as part of that overall software as a service. If you've moved applications into the cloud, you may be using infrastructure as a service. Say you took one of your applications and you're now running it on a virtual machine in, say, Google Cloud. Or maybe you're using Amazon Gov and you're running that virtual machine in there because you wanted the security of that infrastructure, so you didn't have to build all that yourselves. So you're taking on much of the application controls, but there, in this case, Amazon is doing the host infrastructure and the physical security of that. But there is often a shared responsibility for that host, right? You're running a virtual machine. You've got your software installed on that virtual machine, so that virtual machine is split between you and others. So there's a shared responsibility between what you're doing in that container where your application is and what others might be doing on that server. So these are the things you have to think about and understand as you start to determine, okay, when I say all in, I'm going to build everything around my organization, but my organization may need to leverage all of these different kinds of software solutions when I start to consider everything that goes into NIST 800-171. So when I get a lot of questions about, well, if I just move everything into GCC high, I should be fine. And that's true, but you're then going to need to configure all of those different SaaS services. You might also be using some PaaS and infrastructure services, et cetera, when you start to move everything from your organization into that cloud service. So you need to start asking yourself, do I do the enclave approach where I can just split out my CUI stuff, my systems, my people, et cetera, and how much of that will my enclave encompass? Or do I go all in and really move everything from my corporate environment into a fully compliant infrastructure? And so when you start to make those trade-offs, it starts to become more clear in your mind, hopefully, what makes most sense for your particular business. Because if you're an organization that, only 10 to 20% of your organization is involved in DoD contracts, it may make more sense for you to take an enclave approach and kind of gate that information and people off when they're doing CUI work from the corporate environment, because it doesn't make sense for you to move everything and put in all of that additional controls over everybody and everything in a lockdown environment, move all that data, worry about data migration, application migration, changing the way things we do across the company to support only a small portion of your business. And even if much of your business is DoD contracts, only a small portion of those may actually have or be involved with controlled unclassified information. So there's a few different ways to think about it. And I would encourage you to do that and make that, make that cost benefit analysis, because there is a, if you will, somewhat of a knee-jerk reaction to say, okay, well, I gotta satisfy all these controls. It makes more sense to satisfy for the highest level that I need. So I'm just going to move everything. And that's going to be one of those kinds of trade-offs you're going to have to decide as a business. But hopefully this will, this today's session will give you some things to think about and help you determine that decision criteria. Now, the Exostar approach is a little different than moving everything and taking all your systems and moving them up into GCC high. We take the approach of isolating the controlled unclassified information and the users who need access to that and providing it its own dedicated enclave. If you've got information in, say, Azure Commercial, but you want to be able to split off things from for your controlled unclassified information folks and systems, that's where you can start to think about, well, maybe it makes more sense to take that information. This can also be utilized when you need third parties involved in this, where you don't want to invite those third parties into your organization to work directly in your systems. And you instead want to provide them what many of us used to call an extranet to work in that controlled unclassified information with your folks. Separate that work out from your corporate environment so you don't risk that data leakage. You unburden that from your IT staff so they can focus on the corporate environment, the majority of users, the majority of work, etc., and allow this other work to be done in isolation. And in Exostar's case, utilize that as a fully managed service. So our solution really consists of a number of different components. It starts with Exostar's managed access gateway. This is what many of you use today to access a number of DoD prime supply chain portals and other things when you're working around supply chain collaboration. I go to this particular supply chain portal, I log in with an Exostar credential, I get access to that information. Sometimes it's CUI, sometimes it's not, and I gather that information about the POs that I've got to fulfill. Or I go there to collaborate in a particular application with a prime contractor. So we tie that as kind of the base layer of Exostar's managed Microsoft 365 solution. That solution is a Teams application up in Microsoft's GCC high. It's configured to meet those NIST 800-171 requirements. It's got an Exostar application embedded within the Teams environment, which builds those guardrails in place to meet those different requirements. It allows you to set up this system and manage it yourself. Well, Exostar sets it up and manages the tenant. We monitor it. We set up the SOC and NOC to do those different monitoring and 24/7 functions around the tenant itself. Our support organization does the end user support for your organization within that tenant. That application allows you to manage who gets access to it. It allows you to create teams and manage invitations and roles within those teams for your people. So you don't have to come to Exostar to let people in or remove people or anything like that. You get to manage kind of that use of the tenant, but Exostar does the other management around it. This allows you to set up team spaces, bring people into those team spaces, ensure that they only have access to those spaces that they should, and that they only get that if they're explicitly invited into it. The system, as I mentioned, looks like this. This is a tenant stood up in Microsoft's GCC High. It's got that Exostar application embedded within it that does the team creation, user invitation process. It has additional features that it allows to put those guardrails in place to manage controlled unclassified information and the compliance with NIST 800-171. Three of those key features, if you will, one we call compliant file drop. This allows you to create a team, or with a team space, it allows you to create a Dropbox that people can send controlled unclassified information into. They don't have to bring it down to their corporate environment first and upload it. They can give others this email Dropbox. The information would come in. That's where it gets checked for viruses, malware, malicious code, etc. Then people can review that, decide if it should reside in that team space or go to another. It also allows you to send information externally from the tenant without, again, bringing it down into your corporate email environment and then sending it that way. It provides roles specifically for users within the tenant. It has a sponsor admin role, which I'll show you because I'm going to demonstrate this in just a minute, that allows you to manage that overall tenant for your organization. It's got a team manager role. So if I want to create a team space and turn that over to somebody, they can then manage that team space for their members. And then it just has a member role. Member roles and all the other ones are denied by default. So they only get access to the tenant once you invite them into it. They only get access to teams to which they've been explicitly invited. And they don't see anything else outside those particular areas. What we can also do, because this is in Microsoft GCC High, if one of your partners that you want to work with in the tenant has their own GCC High environment, we can set up an Azure B2B connection for that to allow those users an easier experience into the tenant. You can then invite others from that organization to work with you. Now, the whole organization wouldn't get access. They'd only get access once they've been invited. Exostar takes over that trust relationship with those third parties. We're the ones who bring those in to our managed access gateway, recredential those users, and then we allow you to invite them into your environment once they've been vetted both at the organization level and at the user level. So let me dive in and actually show you how this works. So I've got it running here. As I mentioned, this is a Teams environment with an Exostar application embedded within it. I'm logged in as Adam Spark. Adam Spark works for a company called Glory Minerals, and Glory Minerals is the Exostar customer. Now, Glory Minerals has their own people that work with controlled unclassified information with user accounts here in the system, but they've also invited third parties in as well. Adam does all that on behalf of Glory Minerals. Exostar is monitoring this tenant, we've got our SOC and NOC set up for 24/7 monitoring of the tenant. But Adam's the person who can go in, he can check on other users. So one of the partners they work with is Granger Systems. There's an employee there, Emma Jackson, who, Adam just wants to find out what teams is she currently a member of. That maybe he wants to delete her because he knows she's been taken off the programs that they currently work with, Granger Systems with, so he wants to remove her from it. He would simply click delete user and remove Emma from the system. He can add in other sponsor administrators from Glory Minerals. So he went in and added Catalina Sanchez because he doesn't want to be the only person as the administrator for this particular domain. They've gone in and they've added those third parties that they work with. So, they work with people from Granger Systems and other companies. These folks are mainly coming in through Exostar's Managed Access Gateway. So Exostar is proofing the organization and the individuals before they get access into Exostar. And then Glory Minerals is then allowing them into this particular tenant and then into particular teams. We can go ahead and delete teams once they've been created. We can archive teams. Major difference, right? Delete is just that. Teams are deleted and removed from the system. Archive teams stay in that state until you explicitly delete them. If they're archived, you can restore them. If you restore them, the structure and data from that team space is restored, but the users, you would have to go in and re-add them back to those team spaces. You can get information from the tenant. So Exostar provides you the ability to get those audit reports, user reports, team reports, etc. We break out those audit actions by both, things done by this Exostar application, team creation, user invitation, things like that. We also have those SharePoint audit reports, what changes were made to a particular file, who deleted a file, who downloaded a file, all those kinds of activities as well as other activities around those different users, teams, etc. Now, the majority of the work of an admin is on that team creation and user invitation process. So if I create a new team, I'm going to call it Boone. I can start that team and run it for 12 months. Once I create this team space, right now only Adam has access to it. In order to invite other users, I go to the invitation tab. I can either add users individually or I can add them by, Boone's not up here yet. Hold on a minute. Let me refresh that. I can either invite users individually or I can invite them by a delimited list. Here, see if this Boone's now been created. Yep, there it is. So I've got a list of users here. I can bring them into the tenant. I can look these users up. Now, some of these users already are in the system. They're already working on other teams, right? That's this list. If I want to, I can make Maya from Glory Minerals the team manager for this space. That way Maya doesn't have to come back to me, Adam, to add other users later. She can do it all on her own. These others will now have access to this team space. Now, I've got one user here whose domain hasn't yet been authorized. So this is a social domain, but it's not been added at the admin tab. If we wanted to bring in people, we can. They're going to come in through Exostar, but they can use that at yahoo.com, address to register at Exostar. Exostar will then force them through a proofing process, a credentialing process. They'll set up that credential and multi-factor authentication. Then they would be able to get into the system and have access to that particular team. Same here with these folks. They don't yet have Exostar accounts, even though they're part of approved organizations. So we could add them in, and their invitation is going to go to them. They're going to be asked to register at Exostar first, set up their account, set up their multi-factor authentication, then they'll get into the system. But the work itself is going to be done within those team spaces, and it's going to be done here within the web browser. So again, we're trying to shrink that boundary of controlled unclassified information. We ensure that that information stays here within the tenant and here within the web browser. So I know many of you probably use the Teams application today on your desktop for your corporate Teams environment. In this case, you're going to use Teams via the web browser when you come through Exostar to be let into the tenant. You can even use those Teams applications, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, again, etc., here within the web browser. So again, we're maintaining that information here within the tenant. We're also using this Exostar application to put in those additional features. So, we've got this managed teams. In one of these teams, I created a CUI inbox team space. In here, I enabled that file drop inbox on this particular team. So if I go to the details of this team, you'll see that I enabled this functionality. With that, I get that inbox or that Dropbox to others. So I went into kevin.hancock@exostar.com. I sent in some files that include CUI information into this team space. It comes in here, and so it never enters my corporate environment, right? Glory Minerals didn't get into that environment. It came in here. I can then move it into that Boon space for others can work on it. That would then allow them to, again, maintain that boundary, maintain that information in that space. If I needed to send those files to somebody else, there is the send to or send files externally capabilities as well. So let me go ahead and just do this. Oops, I actually wanted to go to that space. Sorry. Let me go export these to the team. Sorry, I wanted to click on the hyperlink to take me to the SharePoint view rather than just click OK. So when I go into that SharePoint view, I can move those files around. I'll move them to that Boon project. I could also choose to send those files externally if I needed to send other information or that information on to somebody else. Obviously, I could do this with other files that were already in the system. Now, much of these files, right, I've got a signature block with a bunch of JPEGs and PNG files, etc. I can delete those because I don't need those. They're not CUI. They're just, those are the Twitter links and things like that in my signature block. This included the email message saved as a PDF. I can move these to that Boon project, and then we can work on those files there within the Boon team space, and those others that were invited to that particular team space would then have access to them as well. But then they're going to work on the files there directly in the team spaces. And so if I go into one of those spaces, one of those teams, I don't think the Boon team yet's actually been established. It's kind of in process. It takes teams a while to actually spin up that space. You can do all the actions, but it won't be observable, if you will, until the team is fully built out. But if this was those files, I could then go into these, work on them directly here again within the web browser. This will open up Word. I can go ahead and make changes to these files and work on them again, directly here within those team spaces. Right. You'll see, I updated this file just a few seconds ago when I did that. So Adam Spark a few seconds ago changed that file. So again, we're just trying to maintain the information here. We can also use those additional features to lock down a particular team. So in this particular case, again, with these different teams, I go to manage teams. I can enable or I can block download and add additional permissions around a particular team space as well. So I think I can't do it in the Boone one because that's not established yet, but I can go to my Boeing team. I can look at the additional permissions around that space. And you can see that I've blocked download on all standard channels, but I have an internal team space just for Glory Minerals. I allow folks to download from my internal private channel, but I'm not going to allow others that we're working in partners with to do that. So I get to choose what I want to allow. If I want to ensure that the information stays here within the tenant, I can block download from all team spaces. So hopefully, everybody, that gave you a good overview of what Exostar does to solve this, kind of enclave solution as a service. It includes, as I mentioned before, kind of those three key components. We've got a Teams environment up in GCC High to provide that trusted collaboration space within that secure Microsoft environment. You've got Exostar and our tech ops and our support team providing both that identity validation, that SOC and NOC services around the tenant itself. We've got training, we've got onboarding services, et cetera, to ensure you can get up to speed utilizing this particular solution as quickly as possible. Now, this particular solution is part of Exostar CMMC Ready Suite. This includes 2 companion applications that allow you to prepare that system security plan. Policy Pro is where you can build your policies for those different control families. It allows you to either use the templates that are included with Policy Pro and then customize those templates to fit your organization. You can also take existing policies and procedures you may have for some other standard, maybe you wrote these things for. It has a policy engine, which then allows you to take either your customized ones or the other ones you created, run that through a policy engine. It'll indicate key elements that weren't included in your particular policies and procedures and things you may want to change to make it more compliant with NIST 800-171. The Certification Assistant application allows you to manage that overall CMMC assessment process. Its output is that system security plan. It allows you to go through each of the different controls, show that you've implemented those, write your implementation statements in, save your evidence there within the control that you've actually implemented that. So it provides that overall kind of centralized place to manage that CMMC program, because that's really now how you need to manage this. You need to know where you are in the process. There are periodic checks and balances you need to make to each of your policies. When things change, you need to be able to note it, update it, et cetera. And Certification Assistant gives you that centralized platform to do that. We have a number of third parties and partners that can do various kinds of CMMC assessments. They can do gap assessments. They can do readiness assessments. If you're ready for that third-party assessment, there are C3POs as part of that partner network. Those folks also work within the Exostar applications. They leverage these often to jumpstart you on that CMMC journey. So for example, Managed Microsoft 365 has 85 of those 110 controls as part of Exostar's shared responsibility matrix. Our partners can work with you to ensure that those are captured and implemented as part of your overall system security plan. We provide you that documentation as well, as long, if you're doing that on your own as well. All right, so we do appreciate if you take our poll. I'm going to ask my partner Doe on the line to go ahead and publish that poll out there. This will take just a few minutes. I've got questions that I'm going to do, as well as one other additional information area for you. Take a few minutes, fill out the poll while I'm talking, just to give us your feedback. Let us know how we did today, but also let us know additional topics you might want to see covered in the future. So as I mentioned, we did get a number of questions submitted, and I'm going to cover those to close out today's session. So are there any grants to help small businesses cover these ongoing costs? There are, but they're typically administered at the state level. What I have found is that there are various MEPS organizations out there, and those again are at the state level. So if you Google MEPS, MEPPS, programs in your particular state, you'll typically find an office or a group there that runs that program. And that does have, in some cases, grants and other programs that allow you to submit requests to cover ongoing costs of compliance. Number 2, should all users in your company be included in the enclave, or is it preferred more compliant to have only the CUI subset of users in the enclave? Now, hopefully, as you learned today, this often goes back to that overall question of whether or not I select to have an enclave, or do I choose to go all in at my company? Personally, it's going to depend on your company and how much of your organization is involved in that controlled unclassified information data flow. If you can break that off and contain it, and it is a small portion of your organization, then I would typically only go for that subset of users. Give them access to whatever enclave solution you choose, and work it that way to ensure that you shrink that boundary as small as possible. Number 3, is it better to have a GCC high tenant enclave or a virtual desktop infrastructure type of enclave? Which is easier to implement and which is more compliant? Now, in both of these, I don't know if one of these approaches is more compliant than the other. In both cases, you can make them each compliant. I think it'll really depend on your different use cases. A VDI, virtual desktop, think about that as a laptop, in the cloud. You're still going to have to, provide an account for a user in that desktop. You're going to have to manage that desktop. You're going to have to ensure it's patched. You're going to have to ensure that it's up, it's got the latest updates and things like that, just as you would any laptop. The biggest question about whether or not that alone can satisfy your needs, or whether or not you need an entire tenant, is often going to be about those different use cases of how CUI flows through your organization. So if you need a place to store information and that VDI doesn't have enough local storage, then you're going to have to expand that footprint into something that also includes storage. So it'll often go into that use case of, well, how does information flow, and then which of these different approaches may work for me? I need to find no-cost role-based training for IT and engineering departments. So I do have this on my next slide, and I also found it, and I made sure I found it on the web as well. So you'll get this slide deck. I did provide a link to that DoD CUI training website. Now, this is the only free training that I know is out there. It is about CUI itself, what it is, how to market, those kinds of things. Don't know if that satisfies all your needs, but that's what I found as a no-cost training implement or standard. There is also free training available at the cyberab.org, which is the implementer of the CMMC program. They also offer it. I don't know how role-based that is. Number 5, it says I have to push the CMMC requirements down to my subcontractors, but is that only for ones I share CUI with? I have a group of software contractors who are working on our stuff with CUI, and the other group of software contractors that are not working on CUI. So this is gonna, I would actually, talk to my counsel about this, or my lawyers, right? Because this is a contractual issue. When you are required to flow down DFARS clauses on your contracts, and so if you receive a contract that requires you to have those DFARS clauses that deal with CUI, then you're going to have to flow those same requirements down to your subcontractors. Now, whether or not you want to take on the risk that you're not going to flow down CUI, or you're only going to flow down CUI to certain people, you know that you've got those controls in place, etc. That's going to be kind of your business decision. Sorry, I wish I had a better definitive answer for you, but I don't, because this really is kind of up to you. As I mentioned, you'll get this as part of the slide deck. I would encourage you to look at the DoD CMMC website as well as that training website. Okay, let's wrap these up. So how do we protect CUI in a totally paperless system? The system is cloud-based in Amazon Gov. So the way you protect it is ensure that you've got the NIST 800-171 controls covered within that cloud-based system, right? Just now, Amazon, has a number of services, just like Azure does, to ensure that you are compliant with CMMC. You're going to have to ensure that you've got all those as part of your overall Amazon Gov solution that you've built. Those things, kind of have to be in place for each of those controls. It's similar as to people ask me, well, if I just get GCC high, is that enough? Just getting, a cloud that is CMMC ready doesn't necessarily get you there. You've also got to implement all 110 controls within that cloud space. Number 7, when do you anticipate the CFR Title 48 to be published? As I mentioned, I think when we started, I did see on LinkedIn today that the final rule is at the Office of OMB. That could have been redundant. Or OMB. I don't know how long it takes to get through that process, but I would expect it before the end of the year. We'd like to have some set of rules that we can implement in the company so that we have some safety from people trying to break into our computers. So this is typically done via, username, password, multi-factor authentication to get into your machine. So it is that user account that lets you into a particular machine. This can be implemented with solutions like, Microsoft's Entra to create that user account. And then you typically use something like Intune, to manage that desktop for the applications that you allow on that to be run. Number 9, what's the best way for IT support transparency and the resource requirements with maintaining CMMC to assist the business cases being calculated by business and product development teams? So my only answer here is to actually communicate. Get these groups together. Make sure that IT understands the use cases from the business, right? Have them sit down with your procurement office and say, how do you get CUI from your bids into our systems? How do you share that out? So we make sure that we're compliant with those different processes and procedures. Number 10, I'm trying to figure out what CMMC level I will need as a subcontractor that provides composite and textile materials to contractors like Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Best advice I have here is to look at your current contracts and determine what their requirements are of you today. If those contracts say that you're receiving controlled unclassified information, then I would expect that you'll at least be level 2. If not, I would, if it's not clear to you with that, I would actually ask those contractors that you work with. So go talk to your procurement person at Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Ask them what their expectation is for you. All right, everybody, we've kind of run out of time. So I want to thank everybody for your time and attention today. Hopefully this was helpful to you and answered many of your questions. We have a number of these sessions every month, or throughout the month, I should say. So please feel free to sign up for the next one as well. Hope you all have a great day and a great rest of the week. Thanks so much.